Halation is one of the key characteristics of an authentic film emulation. Today, we're going to discuss how to build it yourself in Linear. But before opening up Resolve, let's quickly review a few examples of stills from film to understand the characteristics of halation we're aiming to replicate. The first thing you may notice is that halation appears only in bright areas of high contrast. For example, in this still, we can see it in the area where the bright lamp meets the black door. And if we analyze the characteristics of halation, we can see that its color is warm, it has a glow that bleeds into the dark pixels of the door, and its texture is soft. Now, knowing these three main characteristics, let's try to replicate them in DaVinci Resolve. To give you a brief overview of my setup, you'll see we're working with two test images today in Arilog C3. My timeline color space is set to Arilog C3 as well, as this is my preferred working color space. In the group pulse clip, we have an ODT that outputs to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Now let's start building our halation in Linear. The first thing we want to do is to actually go into Linear Gamma and then move back out to our timeline color space. And the way we can do that is by creating a so-called CSD sandwich. So I'll create two nodes upstream of our ODT. In the first one, let's apply a color space transform. We know that we're working in Arilog C3, so I'll set my input color space in Gamma to match accordingly. And for the output, we want to stay in the same color space, but only change the Gamma to Linear. To save time, by holding down Alt on my keyboard, I'll drag and drop the CST to the next node and I'll simply click on Swap. So essentially now these two nodes cancel each other out, but between them, any corrections made will be in Linear Gamma. I'll name the nodes for good housekeeping. And let's begin by creating a new serial node between the CSTs and then create a layer mixer. We'll build our halation in the lower branch of the layer mixer structure and blend it over our original image using the Add Composite mode. So I'll name the node at the top No, as we're just passing the signal of the original image. Next, let's jump to the node at the bottom, and if I activate highlight mode on, you'll see that our image looks very different in Linear. But rather than going into a long-winded explanation about why that is, I would simply recommend watching the suggested video above, as this is the most comprehensive guide I was able to find about this topic. So for now, think of the signal we're seeing as a selection key. What's bright and visible will be affected by the halation. And we know that halation only affects the brightest areas of an analog image. So to mimic this response, I'll use the custom curves and drag the right control point, hence the white, almost all the way down. And I'm just keeping my eyes on the white patch on the color checker when doing so. I'll restrict the selection further as I want to have a more narrow luminance range affected. Now, any corrections we apply after our selector node will affect the areas we see in white. We know that the color of halation is warm. So to replicate this, I'll create a new node and simply introduce warmth using the gain wheel. The correction is less visible on the reference image of Helen and John, but if I switch to the next test chart, you can see how this affects the highlights. If we briefly go back to the analog stills we looked at earlier, you'll see that halation bleeds into the neighboring darker pixels and it has a glow to it. And we can replicate this response by using the blur tab down here. If we raise the blur of the RGB channels equally, you'll see that we'll start seeing a bleeding of the warm glow into the neighboring black pixels. But to accentuate the effect further, I'll ungang the three channels. I'll keep red's blur the strongest, dial back the intensity of green, and have even less blur for the blue channel. And when I disable and enable the node, I think this is the key component that creates a believable emulation of halation. What's good about this approach is that you can customize your halation to your taste quite easily. For example, if you wanted your halation to be sharper, you can simply dial back the amount of blur applied, like so. Or if you wanted to change the color of your halation, you can change the mix of the R, G and B channels in the blur tab. For example, if I want it to be more yellow, I can simply dial back red. And lastly, if you want to adjust how much the effect increases the brightness of the affected areas, you can control this by tweaking the right control point of your custom curve. If you raise it, you're going to see an increase of brightness in the areas affected by your halation. And conversely, by bringing the point down, you're going to be adding less brightness to those areas. To tidy up our node tree, we can create a new compound node and label it Halation Linear. I would advise you to save this as a power grade and simply drag and drop it into an empty node the next time you need it in a project. Finally, let's quickly review how our linear halation translates to actual footage. In the first clip, as expected, we're going to see the strongest response where the bright warm light meets the car's interior, as this is an area of high contrast. We can dial back the intensity by simply reducing the key output gain of the compound node. I think this is less distracting and it looks better to me now. In the second clip, we see a stronger effect on the left side of the frame, where the textured wall creates more contrast between the neighboring dark and bright pixels. Again, I feel this is a bit too strong and distracting, but instead of dialing back the intensity overall, I'm going to open up the compound node and reduce the warmth we have pushed with gain. And I think this looks more believable now. Finally, in the last clip, our halation adds a really nice warmth to the sunset, and I think this helps the look. Again, we can observe the strongest response where dark and bright pixels meet. I think I would just reduce the overall strength of the effect with key output gain, and I think this looks good. And this wraps it up for today. As always, I'm keen to hear if you have any of the preferred methods for adding halation in your own work. If so, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.